Hey guys, today's subject is gaming regrets, and I think we've all got more than a few games or systems that we bought over the years that we instantly knew that we probably wasted our money on. I know I have, since I've been renting games and buying games since the late 80s. Yes, I am actually that old. And today I wanted to share some of my biggest gaming regrets with all of you. This definitely isn't all of them, but a selection of games that still hurts to this day when I think about them. So let's get started with a game that should have been anything but a regret when it came out on the Super NES. Mortal Kombat on the Super NES is a game that I saved up my own damn money for and bought on the day that it came out on Mortal Monday, September 13th, 1993. And since I was fully on board with the Super NES at the time, that's the console that I chose to get the game for. I mean, it obviously looked better from the screenshots, so it had to be the best version, right? No, it was not. While the Super NES version of Mortal Kombat initially impresses with its large, well-animated characters and backgrounds that look like they're straight out of the arcade, it's unfortunately the worst playing of all of the home ports, not counting the handhelds. The biggest problem is that it feels super sluggish when compared to the arcade game, and executing special moves is more of a chore than it should be. It feels like you have to slow down your input so that the game even registers what you're trying to do. Not to mention that almost none of the combos and tricks from the arcade even work at all on the Super NES, and you're left with a weird game that looks like Mortal Kombat, but plays nothing like it.
Raiden wins.
Oh, and don't forget the fact that Nintendo completely censored this version of the game, and you can maybe understand a little bit of my disappointment. The sad thing is that I had a Genesis at the time, so I could have actually bought the better version of the game, but I was unfortunately swayed by those awesome looking screenshots and magazines, which really did make the Super NES version look like the real deal.
Wins.
Unfortunately, it only took about 10 minutes after I got this one home and anxiously jammed it into the Super NES for the disappointment to start to set in. I still played it a ton since I did spend a lot of money on it, but the sting of knowing that I'd got the wrong version never let up, and still hasn't to this day. So if you want to play Mortal Kombat on a console, definitely stick with the Genesis version. It's the better version, and I should have went with that one instead.
Kano wins.
Alpha Mission for the NES was probably my first really big gaming regret. I just acquired an NES and I was dead set on getting more games for it. And that meant saving up my $5 a week allowance until I could afford a new game. And with games costing around $50 to $60 back then, this took a long time, especially for a kid with money burning a hole in his pocket. Enter KB Toys, every kid's favorite mall toy store, and on one particular night, I happened to go into one with my stepmom and a pocket full of $5 bills. And lo and behold, they had some NES games on clearance, one of which happened to be Alpha Mission for exactly the same amount of money that I had in my pocket. So you already know the end of this story. Alpha Mission came home with me that night, and I hated it. It's a shooter, and I don't even really like shooters, so I'm not sure what I was thinking. It's also not a very good shooter. It's heavy on picking up different types of power-ups to build up your ship's energy, which allows you to select from different types of ships with their own unique powers. It's not a bad idea, but you end up looking for constant power-ups more than you do enemies, which can cause some frustrating deaths. This is also one of those asshole games that drops power-ups that actually hurt you as well. So you'll be throwing your controller in frustration like I was when you accidentally run over a power-up that sends you 3 levels backwards. Like I said, I hate this game. Just playing it for this video reminded me of how much I dislike it. So yeah, screw you Alpha Mission for being on clearance when I should have got Karnov instead. How dare you? Captain America and the Avengers on the Super NES was an early game rental that really stung. This is another one of those games where I absolutely love the arcade version, and as soon as I saw the Super NES game sitting on my video store shelf, I grabbed it up instantly. But this was one that only took a few minutes of playing it at home before I realized that this is not the arcade version. Well, I mean, technically it is, it's just a really bad version of that arcade game. I actually did a review on this one years ago when I started this channel, but I don't think I properly got across just how bad of a game this is. Not only is it a bad port of a far better game, but it even takes the place as the worst beat-em-up on the Super NES, at least to me anyway, and I've played pretty much all of them. It just feels terrible to play. You can toss the smooth, fast action of the arcade game out the window here. There's just no sign of that. This is actually one of those games where you just have to cheese your way through it to progress, otherwise you're not going to make it far at all. At least it did manage to get 2-player simultaneous play in here and all of the characters, but there's no friend in the world that would want to be dragged through this game with you. I have heard though that the Genesis version is way better, but I only had a Super NES at the time that this came out, so that was the version that I was stuck with. And trust me, after playing this version, I sure as hell wasn't going to risk trying it on another console anyway. If you want to play this game, do yourself a favor and play the arcade game. Hell, maybe play the Genesis version, I don't know, I haven't played that one. I can at least vouch for the arcade version though, and it's still a blast to play to this day. Just stay far, far away from the Super NES version. So what do you guys think so far? And before you say that I should have just done more research on what I was buying, you gotta realize that we weren't able to just pull up reviews on phones back then. We were lucky to get magazine coverage of any game, and there were a ton that just fell by the wayside and never even got covered. So a lot of the time we were gambling on what we were buying, and most of the time we lost that gamble, leading to situations like these. Anyway, let's get back to these regrettable games with a PlayStation Racer that made me make a terrible decision. Ridge Racer for the Sony PlayStation was a very regrettable trade deal for me. As a game, Ridge Racer is a pretty dang good conversion of the arcade game to the brand new at the time PlayStation, and as a console game, it was really impressive. So impressive that I decided to trade in my beloved 3DO console and several games just to get enough credit to buy Ridge Racer along with a couple of other games. To say that was a dumb idea is putting it lightly. I guess that's just what happens when you're a kid and hard up for some of that hot Ridge Racer arcade racing at home, but it was still a stupid decision on my part. And while Ridge Racer delivers exactly what it promised, it's just one of those arcade ports that has like 10 minutes of total gameplay before you've seen everything. And that realization definitely started hitting home when I didn't have my 3DO games to play anymore. So no, this isn't Ridge Racer's fault, but it will always remind me of why you should never trade in stuff that you like just to get something new. Putting all that aside though, this is a fun arcade racer for the PlayStation if you've somehow never played it.
Keep going.
Contra Legacy of War for the PlayStation is a big old pile of dog crap. Now I've already done a full review on this one as well for this channel, and you can check that out right here if you want to get a little bit more into why this isn't a very good game. But this is definitely one that I couldn't wait to grab when I saw previews of it in magazines back then. Sure, it wasn't 2D and looked nothing like the Contra games that I loved before, but this was the early days of PlayStation and 3D on home consoles. I was willing to give just about anything using this newfangled technology a try, and Contra was no exception. I actually ended up seeing this one at Best Buy one day and took it home to check out some of that hot next-gen Contra action, only this is what I saw instead. A broken down, barely playable mess of a game that couldn't do Contra justice if it tried. And the gimmick of it being in 3D, because yes, this game actually came with 3D glasses, hardly worked since the game's so damn ugly that you couldn't even make out what was happening even with the 3D turned off. The gameplay's just a complete joke as well. It's attempting to be a top-down action game, but it plays like top-down ass. Controlling your character feels loose at best, and the constant swinging camera angles and complete lack of depth perception makes most of the game feel almost unplayable and sickening at worst. Especially when the game wants you to do platform jumping, which it actually does, believe it or not, and it ends up just being as bad as you can imagine. Even the characters are weird, since each one comes equipped with a set loadout, and picking up power-ups only unlocks that weapon to use for that stage. It's just a really weird game. About the only good that I can maybe say about this game is that the music ain't half bad, but that's it. This was an insult to Contra and Contra fans alike, and you can bet the next time that I needed credit to get a new game, that Legacy of War was the first game that I gladly handed over to the clerk. Fighters Megamix on the Sega Saturn is one of the more complicated gaming regrets that I had. First off, before you get the pitchforks out, I don't think that Fighters Megamix is a bad game. In fact, I think it's a pretty damn fun fighting game. Mixing Fighting Vipers and Virtual Fighter together should probably never work from a gameplay perspective, but Sega did a pretty good job here. In fact, you can even change back and forth between fighting styles in the option menu if you prefer one style over the other. Fighting Viper's faster, more juggle-happy gameplay is the default though, and it works pretty well for the more ridiculous style that Megamix has. My regrets mainly come from the fact that I was buying Saturn games at the time as import games, and the premiums that you paid for those back then makes modern AAA games seem pretty cheap. I was told by the guy at the import shop that this was going to be the next big fighting game, essentially hyping it up for a stupid kid. So I threw my $80 at him and took this one home without doing any further research, only to be fairly unimpressed by what I saw. First impressions are everything for games, and this is a pretty bad looking fighting game even by Saturn standards. It does have some nice lighting, but man, it doesn't look too great. And beyond the graphics, I just found the fighting to be lacking at the time, though I think that was more of a me problem. And really, that's the regret here. Regret it myself for not doing research or waiting for reviews before I handed over a pretty large chunk of money. So, no hate towards Fighters Megamix at all. I just needed to be better at making sure the games that I bought fit my style more. But if you've never played Fighters Megamix somehow, then do yourself a favor and check it out. It's actually a lot of fun, especially with another player to laugh at the insanity with. And really, what other fighting game can lay claim to letting you beat the hell out of people with a giant teddy bear? Not too many that I know of. Speaking of imports that I bought, here's Psychic Force 2012 for the Dreamcast. This one's kind of the opposite of Fighters Megamix as far as regret goes. I initially bought this one at my import shop and was immediately impressed with the graphics, fast-paced gameplay, and the whole idea of using psychic powers like Dragon Ball Z in a fighting game. You basically choose your favorite anime stereotype and then get tossed into a fairly large arena where you can fly around at will while tossing crazy psychic energy attacks at your opponents. You only have so much psychic energy to use though, so you'll find yourself throwing out volleys of attacks and then running away to charge your energy back up, which leaves you open to attacks. It's a fun cat and mouse mechanic that works really well, rewarding both aggression and defensive play. One cool thing is that your psychic power shares the same bar as your health, and as your health goes down, that gives you more psychic power to charge up. Basically, this always makes the person losing the more powerful character, since they have way more psychic energy to use at any one time. It's a neat mechanic and makes for a lot of come-from-behind victories. So with all that said, why do I regret this one if it's so damn fun? Well, all of what I described is really fun, but really only just for a while. This is the definition of flash over depth, and what made for a good arcade game just isn't deep enough to last beyond playing through the story mode on the console, and it definitely wasn't worth the import price that I paid for it either. After a few days, I found myself putting it back in its case and playing other far better Dreamcast fighters like Dead or Alive and Soul Calibur, since they had way more to offer in terms of gameplay. Still though, if you've never played Psychic Force, then it's definitely worth checking out. It's a really unique and fun fighter, but just don't expect the fun to last for very long. And that's going to do it. I think that covers a good deal of some of the worst regrets that I've had in buying games over the years. I definitely have way more, but I'm sure I could save those for a future video. But what about you guys though? Have any gaming regrets that still eat at you to this day? Well, let me know in the comments and I may include them in the next video if they're regrettable enough. Anyway, thanks for living all of my regrets with me, and I'll see you next time.